The amateur spends his time in the past and the future. He permits himself to fear and to hope. The professional has taught himself to banish these distractions. The professional does not wait for inspiration, he acts in anticipation of it. Stephen Pressfield, turning pro. With that being said, against the grain, it's myself, Jeff Black, Jason Theobald, and we got Jason Roberson on the other one, Robo, Scoob, Black. We were joined with Dr. Carrie Jones, all the way from the Dutch, I guess, testing group. I don't know the actual name, but excited to have you here because your test is the one that I get asked the most questions about by all the gym pop people I work with. So we're going to get into a dive about that today and probably harass you to a point that you're never going to do another podcast with us again. But it'll be a great one for you listeners out there. With that being said, I want to get into the last 7 days. I'm going to kick it to you, Robo, first to start. I know you were out in Cali a little bit before me, so it's been a minute since we caught up.
Yeah. I went out there to interview an old World War II fighter pilot. The guy actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge, remembers fighting Nazis. So very cool. And then got to go up an old 1940s Stearman, which is a biplane that looks like something the Red Baron would have flown off the pizza boxes in World War I. Open cockpit, you're circling around. So very cool experience, and definitely going to share some photos later on.
Absolutely. How was your weather in California? Because mine was spectacular when I was there.
Yeah, I don't think they get bad weather except this one hurricane, right?
That's very true.
They complain if it's foggy for 10 minutes.
What was the most memorable point of that conversation with the World War II vet that you had that sticks out to you that you could take away? Because that generation, they're all pretty
good question.
Yeah. Some of the stuff they did as far as safety, things like that, we would just toss out. We wouldn't even consider putting someone in that position. The biggest one is if you've ever seen Band of Brothers, when they're in Bastogne, that super cold area where they're dug in, they have no help, they're cut off. They were sending the pilots down to try and strafe the enemy troops through that, but the fog was so low that they were hitting the treetops. So they're losing men just trying to even help out, hitting the treetops. It's a sacrifice of life that you don't even think about, nowadays, how extreme just every situation was that they went into. So that was the wildest one that's still stuck in my head.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That one is definitely different. I know me and you read a lot of World War II books together and pass them back and forth. And some of those stories, I'm like, what the hell? Like that would never exist in today's world. So, Jason, how was your last 7 days? We're selling a house. We're moving into a new one. You're going to throw a big house party for all of us to come up there and, smoke a little pot, drink a little beer, and trash the new place, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I told the story, but I mean, I wasn't on the market. Someone just put a note in my box and said, I love your house, and I want it. And so I threw them an offer I didn't think they would take. And they're like, sure. So, I made like 200 grand in 8 months. So I'm like, yeah, I'll roll. There's just a lot of, I don't need all this. So bought a new ranch, great, perfect size, brand new. Very happy about it all. As far as business goes and Scooby Health, everything's staying busy. Coaches, myself, Scooby U still have an enrollment. It's open right now. We start October 16th, still getting inquiries and people signing up. Everything's rolling pretty good. We have some new hires at AVH and getting them educated and moving that business forward, and everything's going pretty well. So I think that's about the biggest things in my week.
Well, I spent my week in California. I was out there. Stephen Pressfield interviewed me for my book that comes out later this year, and him and I had a great conversation. I got to see his house up in Malibu. I was like, man, you got him right before the rush. He's like, yeah, in 1993, I got lucky. I'm like, dude, this is prime real estate, Great time with him. He took me to Gold's Gyms the Friday morning to train at Venice. That was a super cool experience. I saw Charles Glass, chatted with him for a minute. He told me to tell you hi, and just took in the moment, man. It was super cool. I think you guys know me well enough that I'm not a person I tend to sit still. I'm always forward. And that was really cool to be able to say, like, someone who I've idolized as far as writing took an interest in me and helped me bring something to life. And he actually asked me to write something in his upcoming book for him.
No, nice.
So yeah, that was pretty cool. But otherwise, business is good. I got no complaints. And I want to turn it over to you. Would you like me to call you doctor or can I call you Carrie?
You please call me Carrie. I'm
All
very
right, that's like
formal.
way more relaxed. All right, I'll take that sweat off my brow now. So, Carrie, how's your last 7 days been? Before we get into who you are and all that cool stuff.
I just got back from Alaska. I did the 7-day cruise.
Whoa,
and
how
I
is it?
came home on Saturday. So I'll tell you this. Pros and cons. I'd never been on a cruise before. It's my first cruise ever. And I live in the Pacific Northwest. So if you are not from the Northwest, you're going to freaking love it. The scenery is iconic. If you've never seen raging rivers and waterfalls and pine trees and like Klondike looking stuff, you will get into it. Seals, sea lions, salmon, whales, bald eagles. You're going to see it all. It's amazing. However, I've been in the Northwest 24 years. It's other than glaciers. It was really typical for us. The geography, we were like, oh, another bald eagle, which is wonderful and amazing, but we kind of have them in our backyard and we see seals and sea lions at our coast all the time. And I've seen whales. I mean, I don't mean to sound snotty or snobby at all, but if you have never seen this stuff, absolutely you should go. If you are from here, you will not be as wowed as you think you are. It is also a more mature crowd who is very relaxed. So if you were thinking Carnival Cruise through the Caribbean, it is not. It is an older crowd who is, sitting on their balcony watching the waters go by, which is still also wonderful. And so it was great. It was my mother-in-law's 80th birthday. My husband, his 3 brothers, family went, and great bonding. So it was a great cruise. But I do want to put that out there for the people who are like, I live in Seattle. I'm like, yeah, you've seen it. Other than the glaciers. You've seen it.
Well, that's an honest review. That's
pretty.
Was the food good at least?
The food was plentiful. The food was plentiful. Very standard American, a lot of oil, a lot of butter. But they do cater to a very international crowd. So every night we could get Asian, Indian, Mexican, and then standard American burgers, hot dogs. In the general buffet, if you went to restaurants, they did have an Italian restaurant. They had they had 2 steak restaurants. So you could get really good food, but it was also very buffet style, which was not exactly like making your salad at home and grilling a steak or whipping up a smoothie. It's very different.
Well, let's get in a little bit about who you are and your background. So I don't know you from Adam other than Jay says you are the shit and know everything I need to know too as a coach.
I love it.
Yeah. Jay's a good hype man. Trust me, I've known him for years. So give us a little introduction, background, and then kind of what got you going, I guess maybe into the hormone world and down that beautiful path that it's become in the last couple of years, especially post-COVID.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, sort of, before we started recording, I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. So my health class, sex ed class, whatever you want to call it, was taught by the football coach. So you can imagine how that went. And once I I was in college looking to go to conventional medical school. And I realized this isn't what I want to do. I don't want to it's very, very needed. It's very important. It wasn't the style of medicine I wanted to practice. I went to college in Ohio. I didn't know there were other forms of medicine out there other than surgery, here, take this pill, conventional. And I moved to Oregon and I found naturopathic medicine, functional medicine, holistic integrative medicine. And I went, that's what I want to do. So I went to naturopathic medical school, did 2-year residency. And while in there, got really super into women's health and hormones because I had so many people say to me, I didn't know that's how the body worked. I didn't know that's how that hormone worked. I didn't know physiologically that's what went on with me. I had full-grown women who'd been married for years, 4 kids say, I didn't really know how that worked. I'm like, you've literally had children. Like, how did you not? I realized we really got a disservice growing up, men and women. There was a lot of like, here's how to get pregnant. And that's all, and don't get an STI. And that's about like all we were taught. Right. And so it became my mission when I went into practice. I was going to focus on hormones. Most people who go to coaches, doctors, practitioners are generally women. They generally take care of the family and they generally take care of the kids. Not always, but generally. And hormones is a big complaint of theirs. I feel hormonal. I have PMS. My periods suck. I'm tired. I can't get pregnant. Menopause is awful. Why do I have these headaches? Why am I bloated around my cycle? And I thought, I'm going to really dig into this and help everyone, but predominantly women, learn so they can be empowered. Because man, if we could learn some of this stuff at a young age, and like every decade, if we got like hey, here's what's happening in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s, here's what to expect for men and women. I feel like it would really help our healthcare system if we just knew this is either normal or not normal, common or not common, and how we can address it. And then I found the Dutch test. I was in practice, and they were a startup 10 years ago, almost 11. And I knew who the owner was, and he said, I have this new test. It's a dried urine test for hormones. I said, I'll give it a try. And little by little, I started working with them. I was their medical director for many years. And I actually left them in 2021, then to 2021, and went to work for a lab platform. And then now I've pivoted from that, and I'm back in all hormones all the time. So I still do a lot of Dutch education, a lot of Dutch coaching, because it is such a popular test, and it's all hormones all the time. And that's what I love.
What is it that stood out to you about the Dutch test? Because I think one question that I know I get is, why would I take this test when my doctor does my blood work and says I'm normal? And they always throw that out in quotes, right? Like,
Right.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's not normal, and you can see it on labs. But why would someone want the Dutch test? I guess most importantly, like, what piqued your curiosity to really go down that rabbit hole with it?
So 10 years, almost 11 years ago, the concept of metabolomics was not yet out there, and Dutch was pioneering it. So metabolomics is the study of metabolites. When your things in your body break down into smaller things, so estrogen breaks down into smaller, different kinds of estrogens. Testosterone does the same thing. Everything kind of breaks down into these intermediary steps, is what we call them. And it turns out they're just as active, sometimes more active, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And so the Dutch test looks at estrogen, but it looks at where does estrogen go? How does it convert into its other metabolites and get out of the system? It looks at testosterone. Where does testosterone go? It looks at the metabolites of progesterone. And by knowing this extra information, it's been wildly helpful for men and women who say, I went to the doctor, I got my blood tested, I have all these symptoms, but my blood work is quote unquote normal. And it may be normal. You may look at that screener test, that very simple estradiol, total free testosterone, progesterone, whatever you're looking at, DHEAS, and you're like, man, yeah, you are. What's going on? And then you run a Dutch test and you're like, oh, layers of the onion. We just pull back a layer, and underneath the surface, that's where all the chaos is happening. That's where the conversion is or isn't happening. And that's a big part of what drew me in, because I had a lot of men and women on hormone replacement therapy or really struggling with hormonal stuff. The blood work wasn't just picking up. And once we dug deeper, I'm like, oh, there it is. Now I see it. And now we can do something about it. And I'm not against the blood test. Blood test is super important. This, it's absolutely, it's a great superficial, it's a great spot test. But as we all know, if you're a man and you have a 3 o'clock doctor's appointment and they go, well, you're at the lab anyway, just go get your testosterone run. You're like, at 3 p.m? Just like for females who are cycling, and you got a woman and she's on day 2 of her period and they're like, yeah, just go to the lab, you're here. It's like the totally wrong time to test, depending what you're looking for. And so by having the Dutch test is an at-home collection, we can like nail it. I'm like, look, these are the days I need you to collect. Let's get accurate. You're paying the money. And it's made a world of difference. Jay,
what questions do you have that you'd like to start going down? Because
I think Carrie kind of started a segue there. I think our listeners probably would like to know, okay, so what types of things downstream could this help us with? I mean, obviously there's PCOS where, you're not seeing any hyperandrogenism on labs, but then you see, and maybe androsterone's pegged high. So what types of things can we glean from this downstream that you see mainly are the big, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 that people say, hey, we got to look deeper? Is that something we could tackle?
We'll start with PCOS. That's a great one. This happens often. They've gotten a blood draw. They have all the symptoms. You're looking at them as their coach and you're like, girl, you are PCOS.
Yep.
You run the blood work and you're like, man, testosterone's maybe even lower in range. DHEA is okay. And you're like, God, this is so weird. You have all the androgenic symptoms, hair growth in places you don't want, hair loss on your head. You're kind of angry and moody. pimples, like what is going on? You do a Dutch test and you just see those metabolites you just said. You see androsterone's high, you see the 5-alpha DHT high. Now, when you make the hormone DHEA-S, that little S on there, the S makes it inactive. Your body pops off the S, it becomes DHEA, no S, which is very active, and it can move downstream. It can form those metabolites you just said. One is androsterone, the other is EDO-calanolone. I don't know who named them. I would not have named them these things, but where we're at. One of the nifty things we can see, though, is if those are elevated, even with a lower DHEA-S, inflammation is commonly the cause, because inflammation stops the S being put on. But just like a blocked river, think of a river with all sorts of like options it can go. If you have a log going across one of the like side tributaries, the river is just going to divert. So it's the same thing. You may be staring at the tributary going, there is no water. Where is the water? But if you just moved upstream or moved to a different tributary, you'd be like, ah, here it is. Here it is. It's blocked by this log. It's the same with androgens. So these women are getting told, despite all the symptoms, you're not PCOS because your labs look fine. We peel back the layer and I'm like, oh, you just have a log. You have an inflammation log. You can't get the S on. So you just diverted down other androgenic pathways, which still counts towards PCOS, the diagnosis. And here we go. And then they're like so much relief because they're like, I knew it. I knew something was wrong. And I'm like, yeah, we can see it. No, we can see it in their symptoms. But sometimes, you know, having that paperwork to say, here's the labs makes all the world of difference to everybody. The other thing I see a lot of progesterone metabolites, believe it or not, that hormone progesterone, men and women both have it. And when you break down progesterone, especially in women, because we make so much of it, you have a lot of options it can turn into. When you beta side and you have alpha side. So you have a little B in front of it or a little A in front of it. When it goes down the A side is calming, it's soothing, it's relaxing. So it's really helpful for those women to know if they're an alpha or beta progesterone person, because if they don't make a lot of progesterone, let's say she doesn't ovulate, she's going through perimenopause, she just got into menopause, she says, gosh, I can't sleep anymore. My anxiety is through the roof and it didn't used to be. What is going on? I'm not calm. I'm snappy. I'm snapping at everything. I'm irritated. You do the test. I'm like, oh, your alpha has gone from normal 2 years ago, and now you're below range. So you've lost that bonus, that crutch to help you feel calm, cool, collected, relaxed, and sleep. So knowing that, then women are like, oh, this is so helpful. Now we can do something about it. The last thing, the third biggest is estrogen. Where does estrogen go? Especially when it comes to things like breast cancer, which of course is, you know, the big scary one. Estrogens go down a multitude of pathways. Some of them are not great. They can cause DNA damage, which is what we don't want in any part of our body. And by knowing this information, if she is experiencing estrogenic symptoms, if she's going to go on estrogen as a hormone replacement therapy, again, we can redirect the river. Like, ooh, you're going down the tributary that's going to flood things. Let's redirect you down the other tributary that's less harmful, better for the environment. And you can't get that, unfortunately, in blood work. Yes, I can see estrogen, I can see estradiol, but I can't see where it goes. And by knowing where it goes, I can really help reduce risk and then just get estrogen out of your system in a cleaner way. So that, you know, when your body's done with estrogen, male or female, when you're done, you need to be done and we need to get rid of it. And so that's the test helps to point out.
I have a follow-up. You gave a great example.
I do too.
A versus B in a 2-year difference. What would cause a woman to go from positive A to the negative B in the course of 2 years, for lack of a better way of saying it? Because that's the first thing that popped in my head. Like, well, hell, did her whole life burn down in the meantime? Like, was that just
it might have?
Yeah, you know, I mean,
it totally might have. Yeah. No, the beta isn't negative. It just doesn't have, the B isn't negative. It just doesn't have as much of that, you know, the alpha calming support. Right. Yeah. But think of, and we all have these people, think of your overexercisers, your undereaters, your high stress, your PCOS, you know, going into perimenopause or menopause, coming off the birth control pill, going on the birth control pill, like all of these changing medications that are going to affect ovulation. All of those can affect your progesterone. Therefore, and if you don't make a lot of progesterone, you may not make a lot of that alpha. And as a result, maybe you're more anxious, more irritable, less calm.
Now my question was, Carrie, on this one. So we give, maybe some chaseberry or some progesterone.
Mhm.
Is there any nutraceuticals that can help guide it down more? Or okay, I don't know.
Unfortunately, it's a great question. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there is. We haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. Exactly.
So what we do in the meantime is a rising tide lifts all boats. We just try to raise progesterone as one unit, knowing you're going to raise both the alpha and the beta in the same time, which is fine. We're just trying to get that alpha up there because beta's not bad. It just doesn't have the anti-anxiety bonus.
The calming effect.
Right. So to our knowledge, while things help progesterone, like vitamin B6 helps with progesterone, right? Chase tree helps with progesterone. Not, to our knowledge, we don't know yet what guides. Now, what I can tell you is 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, whether it's a medication or a supplement, could direct you away from the alpha, because that alpha on progesterone is in the same umbrella family is your 5-alpha DHT, like from testosterone. So if you are taking something to block that DHT, you could also block the whole family. It's a family of enzymes for progesterone. So women, especially like PCOS, if they're on something like maybe spironolactone, that's affecting their DHT, and you're like, yes, less hair loss, less chin hair, less acne. Oh, but I'm not as calm. I'm more anxious. I'm not sleeping as well. So we may have to play with that a little bit. And
That's
it is
a
a
double
family.
whammy.
It's not the same enzyme, but it is the same family. So
that's a double whammy, because
it
with
can be.
PCOS, they're going to have almost always low progesterone. So you give one and now and I guess saw palmetto would still suffer from the same thing, just not as intense.
Correct.
Yep. So I usually lead with that before I go Spiro route, but I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
But a lot of people move that, right? They go jump right to Spiro, especially conventional. They're like, oh, you have acne and PCOS.
And help our listeners understand, because I'm probably going to butcher this. Since we're on progesterone right now, the alpha, does that act on glutamate to control that so that GABA can
correct GABA receptors? Yeah. So that the alpha progesterone, it continues to make other metabolites. What it eventually gets to is called allo, not the plant, but ALLO, and allo crosses up into the brain and taps on GABA and says, do your thing, be calming. GABA being our big, what we call neuroinhibitory, calming, soothing, relaxing. So that's what it does. Yeah. Okay. Pregnenolone does the same thing. People forget pregnenolone. Like if you take pregnenolone as a supplement, what it does is it turns into allo, goes up to the brain. It's what we call a neurosteroid. It works on the brain down. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, do you mind if I ask another question?
No, go for it, because mine's still on the same line.
Jeff's got his pen out. He's like,
listen, man, I gotta take notes or I'll forget shit, because my mind's like, I'm like, break it down.
I was going to switch back to testosterone and the 5-alpha, 5-beta side. Do you have another progesterone, Jeff?
Well, I wanted to ask, because she was talking about women who might not ovulate. And now with technology, is there a certain tech you recommend for women to track their ovulation to really stay on it, like Oura Ring, anything like that? Yeah.
There's a ton out there. One of the things I will say, so sometimes women will say to me, I have a period tracker, right? Every month in my app, I'm like, my period started today. The app they will take over time, they will take how many days period to period. So let's say you're a 28-day girl, and it will just cut it in half, and it will say, all right, you ovulate on day 14. But we know the large majority of women do not ovulate on day 14. They may be day 12. They might be day 18. They may not be at all. It's called an anovulatory cycle. Yep. So don't trust your app. What you have to do is actually pay attention to your body. So you should ideally get mucus changes. You switch into a stretchy mucus leading up to ovulation. It's not, if you are not trying to get pregnant, or if you are trying to get pregnant, it doesn't matter. That stretchy mucus is sperm friendly. And so if you notice your mucus is like slippery when wet, you know what I'm saying? Then that's to like house the sperm. So when you ovulate, it's right there and ready to go. And the reason for that is your estrogen. Your estrogen rises right before ovulation, changes your mucus, then it drops, then you ovulate. So it's this cool system. So check your mucus. Some women feel ovulation. It's called Mittelschmerz. They're like in the middle, and they're like, oh yeah, I get these weird like twinges or pains, or I can feel my lower pelvic area. Like, there you go. The egg has been released. When you release an egg, it's like a ripping effect. It's in a balloon, and the balloon bursts essentially. So if the balloon bursts, you're like, what is that? Oh, ovulation. Once you have ovulated, and you have made some progesterone, progesterone is warming. It goes up to the brain, progesterone, up to the brain, to the hypothalamus. You have a temperature center. Just like you have a temperature control for your HVAC system, you got one in your brain to control the temperature in your body. And it's warming. And so you will see on your Whoop, your Aura Ring, if you're temperature checking, you will go up about a degree and stay there. And that means you've ovulated. So if you're trying to get pregnant, it's too late. By the time the temperature has gone up, you've ovulated, the egg is done. But if you're just trying to know, did I ovulate this cycle? And you've got an Aura or a Whoop or whatever, you know, and you see your little temperature rise up, you're like, oh, fantastic. I did. This month I did. Now, one of the things, especially with Aura, I have no affiliation with Aura, but I do have an Aura ring. In COVID, my Aura is fintech designed for men. That's how it started out. They didn't, God bless them, they didn't really include women in all of their marketing and hype and everything.
That's most of the stuff.
Right.
Badly.
So I kept noticing my temperature would go up at ovulation. And so when I worked at Dutch, Aura and Dutch did a study together, because Dutch has a test you do all month. And Aura was like, dang, we could track on the Dutch test and on the Aura ring, it totally matched up. We should really look into women. Well, I posted in COVID, I was like, am I ovulating? Like, as a joke, am I ovulating or is it COVID? Right? Because people were seeing their temperatures go up, and then their Aura ring would kind of indicating, hey, you're sick. You're getting about to get sick. And so Aura started changing. They did an interview with me, and now they have an entire section of their app where you can track your period. You know, they menstrual, right? They'll tell you, like, look like you ovulated, your temperature went up, which is very cool. They've shifted with the times and the people. So it is an option, but once your temperature's up, you have already ovulated. You got to look at the other stuff first if you're trying to get pregnant or trying to avoid getting pregnant.
That was super helpful, because I have like a 15-year-old daughter with my girlfriend, and birth control is not an option, which I want to get on that topic later. And I'm like, what can I give her so she can like be able to track this and so forth? And that's really helpful. So thanks for giving that insight. Jay, I'll let you go.
Well, I was going to say, I wish teenagers, and it can be an awkward subject. You know, I remember, again, right, my football coach taught us that went well. And so, but I imagine if like this was common knowledge that was not embarrassing and very accepted, and everybody knew it. And then women, you know, of all ages, teenagers were like, oh, I know my mucus is changing. I feel, you know, a little bit of cramping, like I must be ovulating. Here's how I track my cycle. I use this app. And like, just to be able to put it all together, because a lot of full-grown adults are just learning about it in their 30s and 40s. And imagine if they knew it at 15, it would probably
change the course of so much.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for asking. That's a fantastic answer. Jay,
yeah,
you want to take us down the testosterone path?
Yeah, I mean, we still have to get to the estrogen at some point, and I have questions there, but I want to go back to the testosterone side. So we know if someone, you know, if a female's more pegged and androsterone, there might be some symptoms of hair shedding, acne. What about the women that don't really get symptoms from it? Are they just lucky and they just build muscle better? Because I understand androsterone is more of the pathway that if you have a little bit more of that, you're going to build muscle better than, say, a female that goes down the beta path.
Yes.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
One of the things we know in the literature, but we don't have a test for yet, are the androgen receptors. So you can have higher levels of androgens, even in blood work, and you may not have the hair loss, the acne, the chin hair, the hair in places you don't want, but you definitely build muscle easier than the average person. So it's just an androgen receptor sensitivity. So your receptor is basically the lock that accepts the key of the androgen and turns it on, builds muscle. So you just may not have sensitive androgen receptors in your skin on your hair follicles, but you've got them in your skeletal muscle. It's just genetically how you are often. And so I'm not saying it's fair or fun or right or wrong. It just is. And that's what we have to work in. The problem is we don't have a commercial test to test for that. I can't look if a woman who builds muscle easily says, I kind of have high testosterone, but I'm not losing hair and I don't have acne. Like, am I PCOS? I just put on a lot of muscle.
Right.
Well, I look at the whole picture for PCOS, but I'm like, looks like you're just skeletal muscle sensitive and you just pull that androgen in, and
I like that. Skeletal
lucky
muscle
you.
sensitive. I'm going to use that because I've
Yeah.
had a few of these, and skeletal muscle sensitive. I like that term.
Yeah.
So
And that's just
let's-
a made up, again, there's no test for it, but I do
Yeah.
read about it in the
but
literature.
it makes
So I'm
sense.
like,
Yeah, but it
I
makes
need a lab to do that. Yeah.
Sometimes those are hard to explain to your female clients. So I'm really
Yeah.
just thinking in back of my things I've seen and like what other people might encounter and be like,
Well, and the reverse can happen. You can have women with low or normal levels of testosterone, let's say, and they have a lot of acne. They have a lot of hair shedding, right? They have a lot of like down the jawline, chin, neck hair, nipple hair. And they're like, I don't understand. I don't have very high androgens in my blood work or Dutch test or anywhere. I'm like, again, androgen receptor sensitive, genetically or ethnically, depending, or both.
Yes.
You were very sensitive. And so one little testosterone floats by and that chin follicle is like, grow a hair. Whereas maybe mine doesn't even see it. It doesn't pay any attention, you know? And so, and that's also hard to explain and even more frustrating to treat because you're like trying to calm like a super sensitive dramatic receptor.
Right. Yep. So let's talk a little bit about the 5 beta because I have a lot of clients that unfortunately are pegged 5 beta. And so if they're more on the 5 beta side, obviously they're not going to favor muscle building as well. But that dysfunction, does that basically signal inflammation then? If they're not balanced in the middle and they're going one way or the other, is that inflammation? Is the 5 beta more inflammatory, being more dominant there?
So here's what's interesting. When I started working at Dutch, I was like, and so the 5 beta, that Dutch test, there are other markers, but the Dutch is called etiocalanolone. Starts with an E.
I'm not
right?
good at pronouncing it.
Right,
So
exactly. Again, I don't know who named him, but it's a mouthful. So I started looking up etiocalanolone because I'm like, what's the clinical significance and what can we do about it? And the only thing I can find about it, there's no money in it, there's no pharmaceutical in it, like no big tech has studied it. But long time ago, I want to say in the 40s or 50s, they found if they injected etiocalanolone into animals, God bless them, that their immune system would fire up big time. It was very inflammatory. It was fever inducing. And I'm like, well, that's weird because I don't see, at the time, what I didn't put together was I would see beta people, but they weren't feverish all the time. They weren't overtly looking like they had the flu constantly, until I started having more people like you and others say, I'm noticing that when you favor that beta side really heavily, they are more immune reactive, autoimmune, inflamed. And I was like, oh, it's cellular. It's at a deeper layer. They're not just coming out with the flu all the time or walking around with a fever, but they are anecdotally seem to be more immune system issues.
Yeah, and I find out then they're fat loss resistant for me. Like usually it's like, this don't work, this isn't working, this isn't working.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, and that was great.
And it's not studied, but it's the anecdotal, experts like yourself where I'm like, okay, I'm seeing this now. I get these studies from like the 40s and 50s. You can induce inflammation, but if you've just got it at a cellular level deep, you're like, well, now you're going up an uphill battle.
Right.
Yeah, not impossible. I don't want anyone to like freak out and think there's nothing you can do. There's a lot you can do, obviously, right? You have a lot of success, but
that one you almost need a coach that knows kind of
100%
doing in terms of diet, variety, and different ways to go in and out and clear that inflammation out.
Right.
For another podcast. Jeff, I'll turn it back to you or Robo. I have a million.
I know. I was going to see what Robo had because, he doesn't deal in the coaching world like us. So I'm curious what questions he has at this point.
No, I come from the client side where my curiosity is what sort of access does the regular person have to this? Generally the doctors say, hey, here's the blood test, you're fine, move on.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you see as far as acceptance in the wider community and access.
So specifically, I will say functional medicine in general, the acceptance is growing. It is not mainstream, unfortunately, but it is definitely growing. Specific to the Dutch test, which is what we're talking about, that is also widely growing just because having worked there for a decade and still friends with the owner and a lot of people, like they're growing like weeds, it's getting a lot more acceptance. And we have a lot of very conventional endocrinologists or oncologists who are starting to understanding the value of peeling the layer of the onion and doing this test in relation to blood work. The Dutch in particular, you can order by yourself as the everyday average client off the website. Now, while that's available and wonderful, it is also a 6-page test with a lot of information. And so Dutch highly recommends, if you're going to do that, let's find you a practitioner. Whereas I'm the opposite. I'm like, I feel like we should find you a coach first, determine if the Dutch test is the first test you need. And then that way you'll get proper coaching around it. If it is, great, they can help you through all the 6 pages when you get the results back. And if it's not the first test you need, even though it's a popular test, it's a great test. Obviously, I'm singing its praises. But like, let's say you need stool testing first, right? A GI test. Let's say you need a whole lot of blood work and that's going to budget cap you. Let's start there. Like maybe you have been standard American diet, standard Western diet, movement is not your thing, stress is very high, you're probably going to start with the foundations. And so I'm always like, find the coach first, see what you actually need, and then let's look at the testing. Because if you've never done anything, then let's go with the foundations and then ease into what testing do you need as you're building the foundations. And so there's different layers of how much help or not somebody needs. So I'm of like, let's find you someone first versus spend all the money, get a test only to find out like it's really complicated to read and it may not have been the first test you needed.
I'm super curious what you think a person should look for as far as criteria and finding that right coach, that right match for them.
Scooby Health.
them.
just Scooby Prep. Is that there you go. They have great coaches.
Giant shoulders on the screen. Yeah.
I've met a lot of their coaches earlier this year and follow them on social media, and wonderful, wonderful people. So
Thank you.
there you go.
Actually, you just got like blown up there for
That's great marketing.
Carrie, what's your address? I'm going to send you some gifts. So I want to take it back to the male side of the Dutch test for a second. Since we're on the testosterone side, usually 9 out of 10 times you see a male's blood work and the testosterone sucks. You're like, get some TRT therapy and voila, they're fixed. What scenario is the Dutch test helpful for a male and for a coach who has a male? Like, is there certain things that a coach should be looking for and be like, holy shit, this sucks. I don't know what it is. Keep digging. Because Robo's one of them in a way. He just does not do well. So I was curious, like, would a Dutch test benefit Robo? Like,
TRT doesn't work for me.
Yep. No, he has a hard time with it.
So this is my frustration with a lot of the pop-up, and maybe you guys too, the pop-up TRT clinics, because they don't look at anything else. They look at your total free and sex hormone binding globulin, and then they put you on your testosterone and send you on your way. Correct. And you may feel good initially, and then often, again, I would, in practice and working at Dutch, I would get the fallout, right? Like, well, it worked for the first month or free, and now I'm developing more symptoms, or I think I need more testosterone. I'm like, did anyone figure out why you have low T in the first place? And sure, in some cases, we can't figure it out. But if you are also over converting, which is called aromatizing a lot of it into estrogens, if your estrogens are really high estrogen and low testosterone can look very similar in a man. High cortisol. Cortisol plays a big role in the production or not of testosterone. And especially that high cortisol at night, there's studies that show like even shrinking sleep down from 8 hours to 5 hours can decrease testosterone production. And how many of your clients are, up gaming, up on apps, up because they're new fathers, up because they're night shift workers, up because they just can't sleep and it's, there's a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think I sleep fine, but it's only a couple hours, I get about 5 hours and their testosterone's low. We can also, as part of the Dutch test, they have on the 6th page, it's called an organic acid test page. So there are markers that give us indications into nutrients, B6, B12, your big antioxidant, glutathione. There's a gut marker called indican. So how good or bad maybe is a screener test is the GI tract, and the GI tract inflammation plays a big role with testosterone. DNA damage. I mean, there's a lot of this like spokes of a bicycle where you're like, wait a minute, yes, it's affecting testosterone, but what if it's something else? Thyroid. While the Dutch test is not a thyroid test, there are cortisol indicators to tell you he probably should go get his thyroid tested. And unfortunately, I mean, not you guys, not Jason, but a lot of practitioners think, well, thyroid is a female problem. I don't test my men for thyroid, right? And unfortunately, men can get thyroid too. It's not as common, but it's sure growing, that's for sure. And I have a lot of men who were like, I had no idea. That's why I'm so tired. That's why my skin's dry. That's why I have constipation. That's why I'm gaining weight. And it affects testosterone, but really it's a thyroid problem. Now we still have to figure out why do you have a thyroid problem, but it helps, again, peeling back that onion. Now, another marker that is not on the Dutch test, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, is prolactin. Prolactin is the pro-lactation hormone we think of with women and breastfeeding, but men can develop prolactinomas, which are benign. They're not cancerous tumors in their brain that secrete prolactin. And I have had multiple men over the many years say to me, oh my gosh, I'm glad you mentioned prolactin because I have a prolactinoma and it absolutely squashes testosterone. It just like completely suppresses it. And I just kept being given testosterone. I didn't feel better. It didn't work. And then lo and behold, they had this teeny tiny little brain tumor, totally benign, just annoying. And it affected my testosterone. And once they got the prolactin under control, then their testosterone often, not always, but often rebounded. So you can see that when you go to a testosterone clinic, if you only micro focus on testosterone, you could be missing out on this whole bigger picture. And if he goes on testosterone, but you don't address his cortisol or his estrogen, like he's going to often feel symptomatic again. And he's going to be right back in that seat going, this isn't working. What should I do?
Yeah, I have a client who the clinic just pushed him up to 400 milligrams a week of test. And I'm like, you do realize you're taking what I take in the off season, right? He was like, what? And I was like, yeah, man, like there's something wrong there. Like that's not right. His total T, Jason, just so you know, 400 milligrams was 700 and his free was 14. And I'm like, there is something really wrong that I can't figure out. So I was curious about that. That answers that question beautifully. I think that, the pop-up HRT clinics, like you say, those are hard ones to deal with as coaching because they're telling you one thing, the client one thing, and you're like, look, I'm telling you, I've been doing this a long time. This is wrong. Like really wrong. And they won't do a Dutch, which is very, very fascinating to me. They won't do any other testing than the damn lab testing. So I think that's something that people should walk away with, especially men on this part. If you still feel like shit, you should definitely go deeper because there's a reason.
Or just ask, right? Just like, hey, I was listening to this podcast. I noticed you never checked my thyroid. Can we get it? Like I noticed, what about prolactin? I heard this hormone prolactin. Can you check it? Like just, little things like that. Glucose and insulin, high insulin can negatively, right? Totally raise your estrogen in men and lower testosterone. Believe it or not, so high insulin can and should help free testosterone. High insulin drops SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. So you should have more free testosterone floating around. But if you are metabolically unhealthy, dysfunctional, prediabetes, like none of that helps testosterone in the end. Like that's suddenly not going to make you testosterone, Superman. So even just and insulin's not commonly run. And so checking a fasting insulin can also add to that picture of like, what's going on with me?
Yeah. And, today Jay does a good class about metabolic syndrome and you're seeing that climb more and more. I know I talk all the time that coaches should be walking through the grocery store because that's their clientele. Because, 7, 8 out of 10 of them are sick, definitely here in Nashville, Tennessee. Me and Robo see it all the time. And you want to know why the testosterone levels are low. And I'm like, it starts there, with the American diet. So thank you for answering. Jay, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Yeah.
Do you want to go down estrogen or you want to keep teasing out more testosterone?
Well, I don't have a whole lot more on testosterone at the moment, but on the estrogenic pathways to the Dutch, for no one who's ever listened, and I think you were touching on it before, Carrie, about the 4-OH being more DNA damaging, thus cancerous. I know not to knock Western medicine, but I know it's very reactive instead of proactive. Wouldn't it make sense to almost give every female at least one who has uterine cancer on the mother's side or breast cancer somewhere, a Dutch test to see where they're biasing estrogen. And then it's simple as, you know, an estrogen control product with DIM and, you know, maybe IC3, and you can bias more towards 2OH. Like, am I thinking right there? Or
yeah, right. We're all about prevention and function as opposed to reaction. I mean, I'm glad we have the ability for reaction, don't get me wrong, but I have so many women, again, a decade at working at Dutch, I had so many women who were like, I wish I would known this in my 20s or my 30s or even my 40s, depending on how old they were when they developed breast or uterine cancer themselves. And or even just, you don't even have to develop full cancer, but I have had women who've developed like what's called uterine hyperplasia. So it's a thickening of the uterus, but if it gets too far, it can become uterine cancer. And so they're like, why do I have this? Well, it's an estrogen issue with progesterone. But if I'd known where your estrogen was going, we could have at least started to help nip that in the bud with the progesterone. And I agree 100%. I think given the rates of where we're at in society, man, proactive versus reactive. If we learn this in health class, you know, even if you don't remember it in health class in high school, but if you were like, man, years ago, they talked about some test or some marker or something I could do to help reduce risk. And men forget these naughty pathways, these DNA damaging pathways are researched with prostate cancer. And so while breast cancer gets a lot of the money and the pink ribbons and the walks and all the things, like prostate cancer, those similar metabolites can wreak havoc in the prostate as well.
Interesting. So if a man is going more 4OH, then that he needs to think prostate. I never put two and two together on that.
Yeah. We DNA damage, we're trying to reduce DNA damage in all the places. And so there is research linking them. So got to be careful. And if men are on testosterone and it's over aromatizing estrogen and they're not getting that evaluated, you know, yes, they may develop low T symptoms. They'll get the breast development, right? The belly. They're like, I'm just feeling moody and depressed, not realizing it can also
what's
affect
the long-term
the prostate.
That's actually really insightful. I got more questions, guys, on the comp pathways and everything else. You guys want to fire something?
I was going to ask her what her thoughts on birth control were, since we were going down the estrogen one.
Since you have a 15-year-old,
well, no, I mean, I also have I just did consult with a woman who is 48 and has been on it since she's 16. And I see that a lot. I see women when they hit perimenopause, the doctor's like, here's some birth control. Goodbye. See, I'm like, oh. So what are your thoughts on that? Does that even have a place, do you feel? And, you know, because knowing hormones like you do, is there any scenarios that's beneficial, or is it one of those use at your own risk kind of in case of emergency, break the glass kind of thing?
So birth control in general is a option for women. I'm super glad it's available, 100%. I'm glad, you know, like if you need it, if that's your only option, if it's going to help for whatever purpose you need it for, I'm all about it. What I'm not about, and what I wish providers, pharmacists, et cetera, did better, was to warn of the side effects. I wish there was a lot more, hey, yes, here are things we know it could increase. Whether it's, we know the big things, blood clot, you can't, headache with aura, you shouldn't take it if you're a smoker. But like, hey, it may also really affect your GI, your microbiome, and it really might affect your mood. And it's probably going to lower your testosterone. So it's going to probably affect mood, muscle, and libido. And, you know, there's a lot of things that the birth control pill could and might for a lot of women. And instead of getting told, that's not true, that's not possible, it's a low percentage, these women get brushed off only to find out years later it was true. And, you know, they went off the birth control pill. Nobody was there to help them. Nobody was there to coach them. Can't get their period back. They're dealing with all these symptoms, what Dr. Jolene Brighton has coined post-birth control syndrome. And I give a lot of recognition to these women because they're not crazy. It is their reality. And while some women do great with the pill and have no side effects, God bless them, a lot don't. And so if we just had more of that informed consent, you know, and the birth control pill depletes like a multivitamin's worth of nutrients. And I talk to my pharmacy friends and I'm like, why don't you just give a birth control pack with a multivitamin, a quality multivitamin, so they don't become B12 deficient or B6 deficient or magnesium or a lot of their minerals, you know? I'm like, good gracious. Yeah. you know? And so I'm not opposed to the pill, but I am opposed to the marketing that it's the panacea and fix-all for women when, man, in this day and age, women are pissed if they've gotten that post-birth control syndrome.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
100% true.
good question. And, one of the big things where I sometimes caution and recommending or having them talk to their doctor about removing birth control would be like endometriosis.
Yes.
Do you know, like, could you explain? I don't know exactly the interplays of everything. Why is that helped there so well? But in most other positions, like when they add, it's really, there's a better way.
Yeah.
Do you know the interplay with estrogen that helps that?
It suppresses. So because the birth control pill, most of the birth controls are what's called a dual bias. So it's the ethinyl estradiol with the progestin in it. And what that does is it completely takes over. It shuts everything down at the brain level. So you don't ovulate, you don't cycle like you would expect. And when you don't have that effect on the endometrial tissue, then it's way less reactive to that rise and fall of your own estrogens and progesterone. And so for those endometriosis sufferers, honestly, it can be life saving for them if they're missing a lot of their world, their life, work, their family because of the pain that they're in. And I worked with a lot of endometriosis women over the years where the birth control pill helped them at least be a part of society. So we would work really hard again on those foundations because nobody taught them that, everything from, sleep to stress to nutrition to alcohol, just all these things that they didn't know. And then we now know endometriosis has a lot more of an autoimmune spin to it. Right. And so really working with that, it takes time. And then if they want, and if they're ready, or if they're trying to get pregnant, then I'm like, all right, let's go off the pill. Like when we're there and support the heck out of them. But I'm not like, oh, stop the pill and then we'll do the work. Like, no. We need a solid several months of work before we consider going off if that's their goal. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And so with that type of case, you need the progesterone and the ethyl estradiol. You couldn't just use a progesterone based birth control because you're not really going to get the estradiol shut down quite as hard.
You don't get it quite as much. I don't, anecdotally, I don't see those progestin only pills have a big effect on endometriosis.
That's what I figured.
Now, having said that, the progestin only pill known as the O pill is coming out over the counter next year. And so it will be available in pharmacies. It doesn't have the estrogen in it, the ethinyl estradiol. It is only progestin. So that comes with its own set of rules that when it's progestin only, it's very high maintenance. It has to be taken at the same time every day, within about an hour. It's very, and if you don't, you're at risk for breakthrough bleeding, ovulating, it sort of defeats the birth control aspect. Yeah.
Cool. Jeff, do you have anything else?
No, let's see what Robo had.
Real quick of that estrogen.
No, I'm going to turn it back to Jason. I'm super curious on his line of questioning. I'm into it.
So, my other thing that I'd like to talk about, and now we're on the estrogen and I'm seeing the Dutch in my head, the methylation activity that you can see.
Yes.
This one sometimes is tough with the markers that you get down in the oats. I've seen where they're methylating poorly and B6, B12 and glutathione are okay. Kind of explain the gauges that show the COMT activity and how that equates to low methylation or maybe an over methylator as they're reviewing the Dutch.
Yeah. So on a Dutch test on page 3, which is all the dials. So when estrogen goes through detoxification, so it goes through it goes through phase 1, which is what's shown on the Dutch test. But in the body, you can actually skip phase 1 and go right into phase 2. So phase 2 is either methylation, then sulfation or glucuronidation, or it can skip methylation completely. We have a lot of options, right? A lot of tributaries in our river. And it can go right to sulfation and right to glucuronidation, which is very cool. But on the Dutch test, they show you methylation. So methylation neutralizes, and methylation uses the enzyme COMT, catechol O methyl transferase. It's one of the enzymes that also methylates norepinephrine and epinephrine, so your adrenaline family, and dopamine, so known as your catecholamines. oddly enough. And what happens is it's catechol O methyltransferase because it literally transfers a methyl group onto the estrogen, and that's what makes it neutral. And it does that with magnesium. Magnesium is the cofactor there, but the methyl, where do you get a methyl? You get it from SAMe. So if you've heard of the supplement SAMe, in the body we make SAM, no E, the supplement we just call SAMe. So SAMe is the methyl donor. Magnesium is the nutrient you need. Zinc can be used as a backup. And then what happens is, they meet, the transfer happens, now estrogen is neutral. You still have to make it water soluble. You still have to go through sulfation or glucuronidation so it can get urinated out or go through the intestines. But that's how it works. And to make COMT happen it's a cycle. Picture a wheel, a circle. And if you've ever done any kind of like heart marker testing or cardiovascular testing, your doctor might have run homocysteine on you. Yep. So homocysteine is part of that cycle. So homocysteine can turn into what's called methionine, which turns into SAM, and the circle goes back around again to you're just trying to pump out as much SAM as possible, SAMe, as your methyl donor. Now, to make that cycle happen, you need a ton of nutrients. Basically, all your B vitamins you need, B2, B3, B6, B12, particularly the methyl form. This is your methyl donor cycle. You need choline, so think like phosphatidylcholine. You need betaine, not like the betaine hydrochloride, not like what you use for digestion, but betaine anhydrous. And you need zinc. So there's you need a lot of these nutrients to make it go round and round. If you have genetic variants in any of the cycle, then the cycle will be slower. You'll have your bike wheel will move slower, trying to get you into SAM. So on the Dutch test, they do look at B6, and they do look at, believe it or not, they look at B12, but it's not the B12 of the methyl cycle. Right. It's the B12 of the Krebs cycle. So most people don't know we have 4 types of B12. 2 of them are in our body, methyl, and then we have adenosyl with an A. So that B12 is the adenosyl one. And then what we also have like glutathione, like other parts of the test, that are helpful to make this cycle go round. And what's interesting is a lot of people are automatically just deplete magnesium. A lot of people are zinc deplete. A lot of people just aren't, you're not eating or getting or absorbing their B vitamins, or they can't take it the next step further. They can't put the S on, they can't go through sulfation. So think of like molybdenum, which is one that is not a very common, nobody talks about poor molybdenum. No. Manganese, nobody talks about manganese. Manganese is part of that sulfur, eating sulfur foods, garlic, onion, what have you. And so it's very multifaceted with the COMT part of the Dutch test. But what will not work is people say, well, I take a methyl B12 and I take a methylfolate. And I was like, well, the cycle it truly is a bike wheel with spokes. Like it a lot goes into it to help as much as possible get the estrogen out.
If we see someone with a sluggish COMT and methylation, SAMe would help.
SAMe would help. Yes, SAMe, magnesium, zinc are very helpful. You do have to be careful. SAMe can
make you overactive.
Yeah, SAMe, go low and slow. Right. Yeah, and maybe start with the other things if you've never jumped into SAMe before you jump into, using 600, 800 milligrams of SAMe.
Okay, all right, that's very helpful because sometimes I'll see that and I'm looking at the glutathione, it looks okay. Their B12, their B6 looks okay, and I'm like, okay, what else do we look at here? And so that's very helpful, I think.
There are other, you can certain gut infections will slow down COMT. Quercetin, so think of allergies, histamine. Yeah, quercetin will slow down. A lot of green tea will slow down COMT.
So if someone's an overactive, overmethylator, then that would be helpful.
Could be helpful. Yeah. Now on the Dutch test is not actually a genetic test. So if you need to know, are they slow, mildly fast, or fast, then you will have to do a genetic test. Yeah. And see which one they are. Most of the population, the wild type of COMT is like a little fast. But you can be faster and then you can be slow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to you, Jeff. I know we're running into about an hour on, so.
Yeah, I wanted to see if Robo had anything before I asked like my final little 2 questions, which are
Follow up,
just
yeah.
generic ones.
Yeah, just something real simple, which is in those moments where you've had patience, you've worked through it. What are some of the biggest aha moments that they had, things that they never would have thought of? You mentioned a few throughout what you've shared, but I'm just curious the biggest things that most people took for granted or never looked into.
Yeah, the basics. Nobody wants to do the basics, right? It's too easy. It's not sexy. And that's a hard one. So we'll be talking about estrogen detox as an example. And they're like, I want to go on hormone replacement therapy, or I'm having all these estrogen symptoms, depending how old they are. And I'll say, well, we have to support your liver. We're going to do these things. And then I'll say, and how much alcohol are you drinking? And they're like, oh, not much, 2 to 3 glasses a night. I'm like, girl,
Sounds like my clients.
like, girl, come on, no. And so just those basics, or sleep. I'll say to you, how's your sleep? It's great. Got to quantify. Well, how much are you sleeping? Well, okay, I'm in bed about 8 hours, but I have 2 dogs and my husband snores, and sometimes my toddler comes in. And so by the end of I get about maybe 4 on average. And I'm like, all right, we can't get rid of the dogs, the toddler, or the husband. I mean, maybe, but like we got to work on these fundamental things, because the big guns aren't going to help the foundations. If we have liver support, but if you're drinking that much, we're just trading one for another. Yeah. We got to work on that
snowball
stuff.
Up a hill.
Exactly. That's a great way to say it. Yeah. So I think the foundation's stress response. And you guys may too. I had a lot of patients through the years who were like, no, I'm not stressed at all. I'm doing great. And is they're like completely twitching out, or they tell me their life. And I'm like, well, how would you rate your stress? And they're like, I don't know, like a 2. And I'm like, you are in such denial, but when I sit down at night, I fall asleep immediately. I never sit down because I'll fall asleep. I just move constantly. Okay. So that's not normal. That's not healthy. Let's work. That's not good. And so these sort of foundational things is a huge I've had a major ahas from people who they didn't mean to, but it's just, they had to survive their life. That's the life they were in. And so it's the story they were telling themselves. I'm not tired, or I get 8 hours of sleep, or I don't drink that much, until we were having the conversation. And then they were like, oh, this isn't serving me. Okay. So I wish I could tell you it was like a magic pill or a magic food or a magic thing, but it's often the foundations that people go, do I have to? Like, yeah, you have to. I'm sorry.
I know, and you'd be surprised about 8 out of 10 people get a lot of their shit cleared up once they actually do the foundations and don't really need to go further with it.
That's why I say see a coach first, or a practitioner first, because hormones are dramatic. They're like Mariah Carey. They react to everything. They're very diva-like. So if you do the foundations, I agree with you 100%. I've had a lot of people go, I didn't even need a hormone test. After about 3-4 months of foundational work, I felt great. I'm like, I told you. So yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Scooby-Doo, what do you got for your final question?
Well, it was more of a clarification, I think,
for
the audience. Carrie mentioned that there is a marker, or maybe even a couple. I only really know of one on the Dutch that will suggest maybe you better look into thyroid. Carrie, do you want to explain that marker? And if there's more than one, let me know. But I know the main ones that I'll thunder.
Yeah, so it's on the cortisol page 5. And so when you're looking at the cortisol page, for those who've done a Dutch test, there are 2 dials. One is called metabolized cortisol, when it's facing to the left or lower. And the other one is your free cortisol, when it's facing to the right or higher. So low metabolized and higher free indicates you probably should go get your thyroid checked. And not just your thyroid, specifically your free T3. Free T3 is your active hormone for thyroid. It makes the world go round. It's the mover and the shaker. And it's the mover and the shaker for all things metabolism, including how you do or don't metabolize your cortisol. So if you're not metabolizing your cortisol, it's slow, it's sluggish. T3 is usually 80% of cases the reason. And it can be subclinically low. It doesn't have to say L on the blood test. It can be just lower than you and us would like.
Like a 2.1 or a 2.2.
Yep, exactly. Yep, 2.5. I'm like, The body is starting to have cellular issues. We got to figure this thyroid out.
Do you recommend
And
a reverse T3 with that?
I do. Yeah. I
Okay.
do often recommend a reverse T3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
my question is probably lame. They're too tied together. But is the Dutch for all ages? And then secondly, what is your opinion on what's causing, like, I guess, the hormone crisis that we're in? You hear all this stuff from environmental, the food, to everything. What do you think is the cause for that? And after you answer the question about all
Yeah.
ages.
How old? 12. the
Mhm.
age limit is 12. Now, Dutch will say, for females, we would say they have to have had at least a couple periods. So
Okay.
she's 12 and she's, had a few periods under her belt. She can do it. If she's 12 and she's not there yet, I would save your money. She's getting there. I understand she feels hormonal and she's chaos and mom and dad are irritated, but like let's get her through into a few periods. Whereas boys at that age, they can do 12, but just also recognize they also are going through chaos for several years. So is hormone testing what you want to do? Sometimes parents would say, we just want the cortisol. You can split the Dutch test up. So they would say, I understand his testosterone is kind of going haywire, but I do want to see why he's not sleeping or why he's tired all the time. Can we just do the cortisol part? Like, yeah, absolutely. For sure. So, but 12 is the minimum that they recommend for the reference ranges. Now, the reason for why I think we're having such a hormonal meltdown all over for a lot of our patients and clients, I do 100% think chemicals is a huge reason, which we didn't even get to talk about. Chemicals will not show up on the Dutch test. The Dutch is meant to test the bioidentical, like what's in your body, or if you're taking bioidentical hormones. So if you are exposed to a lot of plastics, parabens, phthalates, fragrance, chemical fertilizers, herbicides, etc., they act like endocrine disrupting chemicals.
Yep.
They are endocrine disrupting chemicals. The entire hormone system is called the endocrine system. So why are we disrupting it? And that plays a massive role. And it's in our foods. It's in the air, unfortunately, right? It's in the pretty candles you have all over your house. It's in your detergent, your cleaning, it's makeup, deodorant. It's in, sadly, it's, sort of all over. And so what I tell people is, when you run out of one thing, switch to a cleaner option. It can be expensive to just dump everything at once and start over. So just baby step into it, like the four of us have been doing this a while. So we're way further along in our chapters of our book. Somebody listening to this may be in chapter 1. And I'm like, just get rid of your candles. Just take your shoes off when you come in your house. Just, don't drink out of plastic bottles as much as you can. Switch to stainless steel or whatever. Just these little baby steps. When you run out of deodorant, switch to a cleaner one, as best you can, as often as you can. I'm not perfect. Is going to make a world of difference. The other two things that I see a lot for the hormone world, again, I said hormones are dramatic, right? They react to everything. And I see, unfortunately, the stress in our society is through the roof. And I see that in our system, we have two systems. We have sympathetic, which is fight or flight. And then we have parasympathetic, which is rest, digest, repair, heal. And if you're in fight or flight all the time, you're going to divert resources towards that. So you can't heal very well and rest and digest very well when all your resources are getting diverted to fight or flight. So that has a lot to do with stress, internal and external. But one of the big things I learned to help people in parasympathetic is community, play, and joy. And I find in a lot of our society, we've lost that. We've lost community, we've lost play, and people are losing their joy. And so while chemicals play a big role, so does our lack of joy, so does our lack of community, so does our lack of play, and so does being in fight or flight all the time. And so you put those two together, coupled with everything else, and we have quite a hormonal storm going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad. The gym I train at's mostly a bodybuilder gym, but they're all young bucks. And I can't tell you how many guys, 21, 22, 23, are at sub 300 testosterone naturally. And I'm like, I remember getting it done when I was 22 or 23. I was like 900 or something. You guys are a third of it. And they're young guys. They're eating a lot of food. They're just enjoying training. Their testosterone should be great.
Yeah.
And it's terrible, So a lot of them are with the clinic because they're literally subclinical. It's crazy. It's wild.
And it's hard because even someone, there's a lot we can't control, like in the chemical land, right? You can have the cleanest, greenest person in front of you, but they can't control their air all the time. They can't control what their neighbor puts all over their lawn. They can't control what the government does. Like, they can't control a lot of things. We just do the best we can, but our bodies can only take so much, which is why when we do the best we can, the foundations is critical. Because if you're trying to fight this stuff all the time, and then you add a whole bunch of alcohol on top or whatever, that's stressing out the liver, stressing out the system. It's hard. It's like, we're not as resilient as we used to be because we didn't have to encounter what we used to encounter. You know, I mean, like Robo, you were talking about interviewing that World War II vet, and like the chemicals and stuff that they experience in everyday American life, not necessarily war, way different compared to resiliency was way different compared to what it is now, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, thank you for answering that, because most people don't believe that's actually a culprit. And I'm like, eating out of your Tupperware, heating up your food, all the things like that do add up over time. And, I was reading in a couple books. I know Jay reads a lot like I do in this stuff, but they say now that in absence of everything else, when you can't lose weight, like weight loss resistance, it could be from toxic overload. And the burden getting people to release a lot of that. I think Pompa talked about that in his book.
Well, it stays in our adipose tissue. A lot of it does, not all of it. But if it's a fat soluble chemical, that it stays in the fat cell. Like, the body's like, I don't like this. I got to put it somewhere. And it just pushes it into the fat cells. And if it runs out of fat cells, you get more, because it's like, I don't know where to put this if your detox system is not functioning that well.
Yeah. I've been doing this for 18 years, as long as Jay has, and it is harder for people to lose weight than it's ever been. Like, every year it gets harder and harder, and me and him are like, what jigsaw puzzles or pieces are we missing? And then you step back and look at the environments we're living in, and I'm like, well, shit, that's what's changed in the past 18 years. It makes a lot of sense.
I mean, my parents are in the South. They live in Atlanta, and I mean, God, I hope they don't listen to this. Mom, don't listen to this if you are. They still heat everything else in saran wrap, plastic cling wrap, and they use margarine. And I'm like, do you know who your daughter is? Like, come on, But they're not. They're just set in their way. And like I said, I was on a cruise for 7 days, and I watched how a lot of folks led their lives. I was like, ooh. Well, I have answers.
And that's why we'll all be gainfully employed for a long time as educators to keep working on that, because there's a lot of people who need the help. So,
there are a lot of people who need the help.
Well, Carrie, I hope you join us again and we didn't scare you off, because I'm sure the audience, because the one thing about our audience is they engage with us a lot. So we'll probably have a lot of questions to bring you back on to clear up. And, maybe audience, if you're listening, we might be so kind to invite you on to join the podcast, and you can help us with Carrie do something very dynamic. But where can everybody find you, reach you, follow you? I'll have to follow you. I'll have to send you a gift basket so you shout me out too, along with Jason and stuff like that.
Of course. So you can I hang out on Instagram a lot. I'm at dr.carriejones. Website is drcarriejones.com. So those are the two main places. I like teeny tiny dip my toe into TikTok. That's the Wild West. So yeah, Instagram.
I did the same and haven't touched it in 9 months. So
I just hate social media. Like, it started to just turn me off more and more. I'm just like, ugh.
I understand. It's a hard
billboard. Hire me in the middle of Nashville, above the mayor's office or something. He loves me.
There you go. So there you go. I love it.
Carrie, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thank you,
guys. That's it.
Thanks.
All right, that's a wrap.